What does this and this have in common? This uses a lot of this when you need a new one of these. And what is this, I hear you ask? The famous or infamous Crankcase Ventilation breather valve. Want to know what the inside of an oil separator valve for an M54 engine BMW looks like? Well, look no further. This is a used one, mind you. Good afternoon, Morgan, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on my E46 330 Ci. So before we get started on the CCV replacement, I want to give a big shout out to Jason, aka the 50s Kid. I want to give full credit to Jason because I'm going to be using his YouTube video on how to replace the CCV without removing the intake manifold. So the big question for me, and the purpose of my video, is to see how realistic it is to use Jason's method. So let's see what I can mess up this time. So as you can tell, very simply, I'm going to follow Jason's video step by step. I'm going to film the process that I use, and if I come across any issues or surprises, I'll mention them in my video, and then we can see how realistic it is to do this job as Jason has described it. Small tip, just get the top with an aerosol can, and that helps keep all these stray parts from going even further stray. Before we go much further, I'm going to get some gloves, and we're going to put some protection on the fender so I don't scratch it, because I'm going to be leaning right in this area. With the intake plenum and the air filter now removed, we'll take off the DISA valve, which will give us access to the clamps which hold on the rest of the intake boots. In my E46 I have the M54 engine installed, which is exactly the same engine that's on the E39 that we have. So the process that we use here should also apply for the E39. So the DISA flap screws are a little bit tricky to see. There's one at the top. And the other one's on the bottom left. As you can see, we've already been in here, and I changed out the plastic DISA flap with an aluminium one because of the problem with this screw falling out. But in this case we don't have a screw because I changed it out. Next on the list is to remove the clamps on the intake boot. There's one at the end of this little tube, and then there's one on the throttle body. And once those clamps are removed, we can take off the intake boot. With the small boot now removed from the idle control valve, you can now see behind. It's a little bit tricky to reach, but with a 1/4 inch extension you can reach down with a long socket and pick up on the air intake boot clamp. So that's the clamp loosened, Let's now gently pull on the boot. There we go. So that was the clamp that we were loosening. And that's the throttle body where the intake boot is clamped onto. And with that now removed, we have a lot more clearance and hopefully find the Torx bit. And this is another part that's a regularly failing part on BMW 330s, but we actually already replaced this last year and it seems to be still in good shape. So now let's find the Torx bit, and after that we can carry on with the main job in hand. So now we have to try and find the Torx bit that fell into the engine bay, and I think it fell on the bracing plate. Oh, what's that? Oh my goodness. Looky, looky, looky. We got it.
How to remove all of these really common parts, and then come back to this video and then we'll get started. So where we need to go from here is we need to remove the dipstick tube. We need to remove this electronics box. We're going to unbolt it and sort of move it across to over here. Then we need to remove the idle air control valve and the throttle body, and then we'll finally have access to everything that we need.
We have to take the dipstick out first, remove this electronics box like he said, but I guess we'll be able to gain access to the CCV, which is buried underneath the intake manifold. And to start the dipstick tube, we can take off the screw down here. See how close we can hold to Jason's process. Before we do that, I'm just going to label the two connectors that we took off. That's the mass airflow sensor connector, and that's the DISA flap connector. I'm too stupid not to remember where everything is, so I'm just going to make it easy for myself. Having a working pen would have been a good start. That's better. So with those two labelled, we'll be sure to put them back where they belong. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Before we get into this mess, we have to actually remove the air intake for the climate control. This is where the pollen filter sits. We need to remove this entire assembly so that we can remove the engine cover. So let's do that now. While you're in there, looks like I could do with a new one of these. Good thing we rescued the Torx bit. That's where the clips go on onto those little tabs, and you just have to pull the clip parallel with the shape of the tab. And now we have access to these two caps, and we can remove this small plastic engine cover. Now with the engine cover removed, you can start to see parts of the CCV system all underneath this intake manifold. So let's take a closer look. So here's one of the CCV breather lines that we have to take off, which is connected to this system of pipes. And then this pipe is one of the ones we'll be replacing, but the main CCV itself is buried underneath these connectors. So now we've removed the climate control intake manifold and the plastic cover plate, we can now move back onto the main process of getting the dipstick tube out. And we start by removing that bolt, and once we remove that bolt we can take out the dipstick. There's a bracket attached to the dipstick tube which holds on a couple of vacuum tubes, so I think I ought to remove them before pulling it out. All I did then was disconnect those hoses from that clip, which means when I pull out the dipstick tube it shouldn't pull those hoses with it. And there we go. Looks like it's coming out. It's still caught up somewhere. That electrical box seems to be a little bit in the way, but if you twist it, there we go. And I'm now dripping oil. Whatever oil was in the dipstick leaked out, but not too much. So at least we can clean that. The dipstick tube is now freely moving. The bracket is free. What's happening now is that pipe, that's the drain from the CCV to the dipstick, is stopping me pulling that. So now the dipstick tube is pulled out of the way. You can see that is the drain pipe coming from the CCV, and just above it there's the hole that's going into the engine block. That hole that you can see at the end of my pointer is a direct line into the engine sump, and I don't want to leave that uncovered. So what I'm going to do is put a little piece of blue roll in. The return line from the CCV, I'm just going to cut it because I'm replacing it anyway, and that will let me get the dipstick tube out and make life a bit easier to access the hole in the sump where the dipstick tube goes in. Finally, you can see now the pipe is free to come out, theoretically. There we go. So there's where I cut the drain pipe from the CCV, which we're replacing. So all I've done is put a bit of blue roll over the hole that goes into the sump. Now with the dipstick tube removed, access is a bit easier, and we're going to remove the idle control valve, which is just above the throttle body, and then the electronics box, just like Jason showed in his video. Here's a closer look at the dipstick tube. And what I've just realized is the O-ring that's normally here must be stuck in the engine block, but I can feel with my finger the O-ring is still in there, so I'm just going to grab a pick and try and get that out. So I'm just using a small pick to try and reach the O-ring, and there we go. Hopefully that all got captured on camera. You can see there's a little bit of rust. It's now got in exactly where I didn't want it to go in. Some dirt has got into the oil sump, so let's see if we can grab that with a towel and clean that out before we do any damage. Got the old O-ring out, and you can see some of the rust that was at the bottom of the dipstick tube, which is why some was hanging around. To have been able to clean out the crap that was in there, but but the bits of dirt that fell in, I was able to grab them with my finger and they stuck to it. I was able to pull them out. Clean a little bit of that machine surface where the O-ring sits, and then I'm just going to stuff some blue roll in there to prevent any further contamination. There is a fair bit of peeling paint you can see here, and rust, and that's one of the reasons why so much dirt had got into the area where the O-ring was. The O-ring would be sitting there, that's the old one, and all this flaking paint, some of it had dropped into the hole for the sump, and that's what I picked out. So I think we're going to have to clean this up properly and get a good layer of paint on it. The important thing is, this is the return line that Jason was explaining from the CCV valve, and it comes into the outer part of this dipstick tube, the housing. So first thing we're going to do is clean this out, make sure there's no blockages, but it looks reasonably good so far. No mayonnaise at least. Maybe we saved this at the right time. The hose is still okay. There's no blockages or dirt, so that's a good sign that the CCV hadn't actually got completely blocked. So looking inside the drain tube from the CCV, it's completely clean and unblocked. So it's a good sign the CCV is still working, but the car is definitely using oil. That's one of the jobs I wanted to do for a long time. Now we're going to remove this electronics box, and Jason has kindly demonstrated that there's a screw here, and one hidden between the throttle body and the casing of the electronics box. So let's get those three out, and then we can move this electronics box out of the way. So that's one of them, that's the second one. Now let's try and find the mystery one. The electronics box has a stud. Oh yes, so the bolt and the stud are right beside each other. So I'll try and show it a little bit. So that's where the stud is, which is for the electronics box, and that's where the bolt is, which is for the throttle body. So bolt, stud. And again, I wouldn't have known about this if it wasn't for Jason's video. They're very close together. You can definitely feel the difference. Okay, just trying to visualize. I'm definitely on the stud and not the bolt. And it's not very tight. Seems to be a washer on it as well, but there we go. So it's worth taking your time with that one. And then you can feel the stud and the bolt are very close together. It's the same nut. BMW consistency at its best. We have a bolt here. That should then allow the electronics box to come off. Now it looks like there's a few electrical connections that we need to take off as well. And I think we have to take off at least that connector. And there's another one here. That looks like something to do with the idle control valve. That solenoid, I'm not sure. I think that's the EVAP solenoid, but I'll check on Jason's video and then label them accordingly. So pretty basic labeling. This cable is going to the idle control valve, so just idle control valve. This is the EVAP Purge Solenoid, and this one is going to the oil filter housing. I think that's a oil pressure sensor, could be an oil temperature gauge, but in this case it doesn't matter. I just know that's going on to the oil filter housing. So once I pull it off, then I know that's the oil filter housing in there. And then there we go. Obviously not the hand I'm using to hold the GoPro. There's the CCV valve, right underneath the manifold. Lovely. So we have all the electrical connections labelled, but I found another one which Jason did mention, and it's back there. That's also connected to the oil filter housing, because the other one from the oil filter housing has two electrical connectors. Yes, thanks Jason. So this is the single prong one, so we know this one with the single prong, so we'll get it labelled up to. Back on to the EVAP solenoid. We're just going to unplug it. The squeeze. Okay, so this is a slightly different design to the one on Jason's video. Jason's video, there's a clip like my fingers here that goes in, you push it in, but on my version you push this plastic ring to expand these two clips. So it's a slightly different design, and it also has a bracket here. Then we can also pull this hose out of the way, which gives us a bit more clearance now. And the EVAP solenoid itself, you can just pull off this tab, and again, it's all for the benefit of space. And that is one of the main CCV tubes coming from the the valve cover. So that tube goes all the way to the bottom of the CCV, and now we can start to see this the breather valve much more in focus. It's much easier now to see how we're going to access this thing and start to pull it apart. Now we can remove the idle control valve. To get the idle control valve out, we need to take this screw out, which we've already done. So maybe I did a bit of foreshadowing and I knew what was coming. At least I can tell myself that. So getting the other screw out is much easier now that the DISA valve is out of the road. And now we're ready to pull out the idle control valve. There we go. This inlet or outlet from the idle control valve slots into this little intake boot. It's like a grommet really. The idle control valve just needs to push into this rubber piece. Does the idle control valve still flap? Yes. You can see the valve inside the idle controller is still rotating, but I do feel it's a little bit sticky. We might have to clean it again. Seems to be something you have to do on these cars regularly. This valve, when it gets stuck, you get an idle problem when it's cold, where the whole engine actually vibrates and it feels like it's missing or misfiring on one cylinder. But it's all down to this idle control valve. And when you shake it, you should hear this noise. So this one's still free, but we'll clean it out while we're here. So next we're going to take the throttle body off. And there's 4 bolts, 2 in the top, 2 in the bottom. There's the electrical connector. Push this tab in, and then it should come off. Ta-da! Okay, so now we're gonna take these 4 bolts off, and then we'll slide out the throttle body. not very tight at all. So we'll get those whipped out. And we can see that they're all the same. Oh, well, that was pretty easy. And there we have it. Throttle body removed. And we can possibly clean that. Carb cleaner possibly would be better. Doesn't look like this has been removed since it was installed at the factory. But we do have a new gasket for it, so it doesn't look like it needs much compression. And let's see now what we can see. So now you can really see the CCV valve. And there's loads of access from here. Hopefully that is enough access to be able to dismantle the CCV valve and get it out without removing the manifold. Now we need to get this tube off. That bottom tube down there is the one going to the oil dipsticks, so we've already cut that. We don't need to remove it from the valve. I'm not going to try and take this off with the view of keeping this, because I already bought a new one. And Jason recommends just breaking these tabs off, because there's no real access here to be able to pull that off normally. So just break off the tab and then it should just pull out, and it runs up underneath the manifold and it comes onto the valve cover. And see if I can do this one-handed. Push those two plastic tabs in. And there we go. So that's, well, that's how you normally would take it off, by pushing those two in. But in Jason's video he recommends for the other side just breaking it. Now I can start to see, oh, a little bit of build up. And you can actually hear a bit of crunchiness. There, this crunching you can hear. You can see this plastic has become very brittle. So now I'm not worried about breaking the clip, because there was a good reason to buy a new one. Screwdriver! But all we're doing is going underneath the clip and trying to break it off. Managed to break the clip off with the camera. It's exactly where I stuck the screwdriver, but here's the clip that I just broke off. So let's see. Ah, there we go. So there we go. Oh, you can actually see the CCV valve. This pipe is quite clogged, so we definitely made the right decision to change this. Now, can I get this out without dropping all this goo everywhere? Probably not. Oh, just twist. There we go. This thing is starting to get really clogged up. There's all the gunk that came out of the pipe. So the CCV valve was definitely blocked quite badly. The next pipe we have to deal with, and that runs into the side of the CCV valve. That's the other end of the pipe there that goes into part of the air distribution manifold, this thing here. And so Jason reckons just cutting it, because it's not a straightforward reconnection, it's a twist. Make sure you're cutting the right pipe, and let's go for it. And you can see how brittle that pipe was. Obviously there's a bit of oil because it's a crankcase breather. We can then do the same thing. We'll be able to see how I did this for the other one. So just break tab, pushing the screwdriver in and twisting. That's how I did the other one. There we go. So we just broke the clip off. You can see the clip on the other side. Those are the two main tabs that hold it in. They're now out. In order to get this elbow out, I have to disconnect this pipe, but this pipe runs the whole way to the back of the manifold and runs in here. So to get that out, we have to go to the other side. So this is the pipe clip. I need to break as I just cannot see past the camera now. So let me get that done and let's look at it after together. Basically I just pushed forward on the two tabs there and there. We'll take a look at it from the other side. I pushed on this clip either side from obviously the other side, but what it did do is that I pushed it off. You can see where I broke the clip there, and that was enough to spread the two tabs. Pipe connection removed. There we go. Oops, sorry, I can't see. That's that pipe. Now it does run under this electrical connector injector. So all I did was unplug. Looks like in a coil pack or an injector. And now we can lift this pipe out. Underneath. Oh, haha! Looky, looky. Look how brittle this pipe was. So there's no doubt this is ready for replacement. So now, let's see. There we go. Now we have several sections of pipe. So this is all getting replaced anyway, but you can see obviously if you wanted to keep the pipe, doing this with the manifold in situ would have been virtually impossible. Second part of the breather system. Now we have most of the pipes disconnected. We should be able to unbolt the CCV to pull out the CCV valve, and there's two torque screws, plastic screws, are like okay. Now can you guys see the other screw? I can't, so oh, is that it? No way. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see. Oh man, I've lost it. No, go back, go back. Where is it? No, don't thread it, don't drag it, it's plastic. Man. This is the bit I was worried about. Okay, so, wow. I hope you guys are able to see all this. Otherwise it'd be a real shame. Okay, so that's both screws out. Now, does the CCV valve really just come out? Okay, so we have the oil dipstick pipe that we already cut. See. Ooh, I think it's going to come out, guys. It's the other end of the pipe, I think. Can you see? The pipe is trapping the valve from coming out. That pipe that's connected is a twist pipe. It's not a pipe that you can break the connector off. So what I did was I reached my hand in and I twisted it a little bit. Twisting it just like that was enough to turn the pipe from this angle, and then I was able to pull out the CCV valve from the car. So there we go. CCV valve removed. Intake manifold not removed. But the main thing is we got the old one out. So while you're in there, can you see the slight oil leak that I have at the back of the venous pipe? The two washers at the banjo bolt, you can see an oil weepage. Just those two washers that need replaced. So the washers you can see at the front and the back of the banjo, where the bolt torques the banjo down. Because I did the oil filter gasket housing last year and I cleaned this entire area, but now you can see I have a very slight oil leak. You can see the oil pooling in the block. It's coming from the banjo bolt and the back of that pipe. The top of the pipe, the washers are new because I changed them while I was doing the oil filter gasket housing, but down here I didn't change those washers. You can see that they're leaking because I did the oil filter gasket housing last year and there was quite a lot of oil back here. That oil leak is new because I already cleaned all this out. Might as well change that out. What that means is we can't put the CCV back together until I get those washers, but we'll get it done.